Kia ora and welcome to the Niggly Niche Cast. It's your boy, the Diggity Doo-Dah Doc, Mr. Peptide Panther, here to discuss Kiwi sporting matters from the land of the long white cloud, otherwise known as Aotearoa, where we are also known to raise our mana and stay beautiful. As always, I'm joined by the Wobbly Wildcard. I'm going to throw it up to you, Mr. Wobbly Wildcard, and I would like your, I wouldn't say inspirational quote because they're not inspirational quotes, but your little mindfulness quote for today, if you could package that along with a greeting to myself and our powerful listeners.
Yeah, g'day. How's it going to yourself and our powerful listeners? Well, I haven't got today's one because we're recording before the time it's actually popped up, but here's yesterday's one. A lovely old quote from Mr. David Lynch, who's a fellow who I've linked a couple videos to in recent times in the newsletter that we do. Legendary filmmaker and such. Where are we? And also a fellow who's just gone mental on YouTube at the moment with some outrageously good and extremely Lynchian content. He says, quote, "The thing about meditation is that you become more and more you." And the word "you" is in capitals. It's just a little bit of extra emphasis. The thing about meditation is that you become more and more you.
Nice. That's solid. That doesn't take too much brain power to figure that one out, unless you want to go real deep and get a bit funky with it. But I'm sure everyone appreciates that. Best way to support the Niche Cache and the Niche Cast is on Patreon, so jump straight on Patreon and get us up the guts there. Otherwise, we also do an email newsletter. It comes out Monday and Friday, so we'll be dropping one tomorrow, and there's always a bit of extra funk in those email newsletters. On the agenda today, we have some NBL discussion. National Basketball League in Aotearoa continues to roll on, and just quietly, I'm really enjoying the just the presence of the NBL, having it there every night. There's a 5:30 game, there's a 7:30 game, you can count on it, and that's what we love about sport. It's just that scheduled viewing. We also have a couple of Kiwi cricketers who are going over to the Caribbean Premier League. Gets underway mid 18th of August, so mid to late August. That's very interesting. And I love how those T20 tournaments, less the IPL, because, players barely play in the IPL. You got to be a superstar to be playing in the IPL, so it's less interesting. But those international T20 tournaments provide a lot of interesting context for Blackcaps T20 international matters. And at some stage over the next 12 months, I think we might get a World Cup of T20 cricket as well. So that's all part of the landscape, all part of the context. We have some bit of Warriors chat as well, coming off that game against the Broncos, that strange old game against the Broncos last weekend. We didn't talk about them earlier in the week, and they're playing the Titans this weekend. And we also have a little, we're going to have a little kōrero about players and teams, primarily Aotearoa related, because everyone was talking about winning the pandemic, and Joseph Parker might have been a good candidate for winning the pandemic based on his performances on social media. This is about winning the post-pandemic. So sports has started up again. Who are some of the players and teams who have done a fantastic job post-pandemic to raise their stocks, raise their reputation, and just come out guns blazing? So we'll get into some of that as well. But first, Wildcard, I've been looking around the Kiwi and Australasian sporting landscape, and Bill Simmons he's talked a lot about player empowerment in the NBA and how there's been a shift from team focus, team empowerment obviously, to a more player-centric way of operation. So it's just the players looking out for themselves and, just doing what they want to do. Do I want to go join a super team? Do I want to cash in? So many options, and that's been a interesting topic of discussion that he's raised for the last few years. And I think it's quite clear, actually, in Australasian sport that we are in the player empowerment era. When you look at what Beauden Barrett's doing, like, not everyone is Beauden Barrett, and he has a lot of leverage. All Beauden Barrett cares about at this stage is what is best for him. And that's okay. It's not like he's being selfish and that's negative. No, this is the player empowerment era, so it is all based around doing what is best for you. And that's what Beauden Barrett has done, and he's done it to a almighty extent. And that's been interesting to watch him. Like, Beauden Barrett is arguably perhaps the best rugby player in the world, so he has a lot of leverage, and he's not fucking around with that leverage. Like, he's using that leverage to the utmost, and I find that rather interesting. And then you look around the NRL, and you look at a lot of the discussion around player management and player agents and their involvement, which has been a hot topic recently. And other than like player managers in the NRL controlling entire NRL teams, which is just straight up weird, and the NBA actually introduced rules a couple years ago to stop that happening. So player agents are player agents, and those same player agents cannot have coaches as their clients. You need to be a coach agent, coach manager, whatever it is. And I think that's a key thing for the NRL to implement. But that whole point is based around the manager doing what is best for the player. And I was drawn back to when Blake Green left Manly Seagulls and came to the Warriors. And that was all, there was heavy player agent involvement, but that was Blake Green strictly looking out for himself, and he got out of his Manly Seagulls deal, which wasn't completed. He got out of that deal and took up a better, more financially rewarding, and a longer deal with the Aotearoa Warriors. And like, that's happening all around the NRL. Like, players are just essentially, a lot of the big name players just looking out to get the most money. You got John Bateman. His move back to England seems to be family related, but it's a case of him doing what he wants to do, not necessarily putting team first, or that's speculation. But overall, I think players in this part of the world, there is a lot more player empowerment involved. Do you have any like other examples that come to your head, or in Kiwi and Australian sport, to kind of take this further, Wildcard?
Sort of. I can definitely take it further. I mean, I'm looking at a list of the NBL like stats and stuff on my other screen here, and was sort of thinking back as you're saying some of that about like the whole process with that draft there, and it was very like the NBL set up, obviously like unique circumstances for this, but like the NBL kind of set up this special edition league, and it was like you buy in or you don't buy in. It was just a matter of players to put themselves forward, and it was not quite the same thing, but it's, I guess, a similar model, because it was very much up to players if they wanted to be involved or not. And also 3 of the teams chose not to be involved as well, which I guess complicated matters a little bit. For example, you didn't see any of the Breakers guys turning up. You did see a couple from other NBL teams, particularly a couple of those development players as well, who have also done very well. And it's one of the things that's been extremely fun to watch throughout this. But the other one that sort of sprung to mind is like often when these things, like when you get down to like butting heads between player and teams and transfers and stuff like that, generally there's a defining factor that can appease everybody if it comes out right in the end, and that's like money. And when I think about the areas where the most money is being thrown around in this kind of way, I think English Premier League football, European football in general, and there's a little bit more in terms of just like because you don't really have trades per se like you do in the NBA, where like an NBA player is upset, they can ask for a trade, and then a team might say, well, we don't really want an upset player, especially not if we can get value back for them, trade what they might be worth to another team and get back something better for us, like more in line with the timeline of the development of this team. Like if you want younger players or whatever, or veterans on expiring deals who'll help you on a playoff run, that kind of thing. You don't get that in English football because of the transfer fees and whatever, and so you do get a bit more of that kind of thing, which where it's like It's chucking, apologies for chucking the Manchester United example in every time, but that's where my head's going to go automatically. Like someone like Alexis Sanchez, who actually did come over on a swap deal, actually, with Henrik Mkhitaryan going to Arsenal, and one of the worst transfers in the history of the Premier League, to be honest. Both teams somehow got worse because of it. Sanchez signed a massive money deal, which then empowered a lot of other players to say, well, how come he's getting this much money? He's sitting on the bench doing absolutely nothing. Like, maybe I deserve something close to that amount of money, seeing as I'm actually playing and scoring goals and that kind of thing. And then you've got this long-term deal, which you can't get him out of. He's been away on loan at, I think, Inter Milan this season. And by accounts, he's having his best year for a couple seasons. I don't know what they'll do with him next year, because they'll either have to send him out on loan, integrate him into a first team that he's never looked a part of before, or whatever. And you've also, of course, at United, you've got the agency thing rearing its ugly head quite firmly as well, with the case of Paul Pogba, and you've got that Mino Raiola dude who is an absolute bastard by, I would say by all accounts, but especially by Sir Alex Ferguson's account. He always fell out with him. Mourinho had a bit of a better relationship, and he managed to sign it. Like Zlatan Ibrahimovic is another Raiola client, and you see this kind of thing where like the agents acting on behalf of players, extremely more like the teams have less leverage without the trading thing. You do like still see big transfer fees, and players generally, if they want out, will be able to get out, but then it's a matter of balancing. Like Alexis Sanchez won't get paid this much money to go play for another club. Like if he wants that paycheck, he has to stay or go out on loans or that kind of thing. But so the teams have slightly less leverage, I think, if you sort of bring it out in the wash and that thing, but the player agents have the most leverage, and they're getting massive payoffs for these big money transfers. So like if you're representing Paul Pogba, you kind of want him to go to Real Madrid or something like that, because you're going to get like $10 million in your like agent fee if that actually goes through, which hopefully not, because Pogba's playing outstanding at the moment for United and their midfield looks fantastic. But that's probably, I don't know, in some ways I like that model better, because it is a little bit more, I don't know, equitable, I think, maybe, or just like you have a few less factors to complicate things. But then on the other hand, I hate the influence that player agents have in football, and the more money that's involved, the more that becomes true as well, which gets real tricky, because they just act on behalf of players and start telling players what to do. So I don't know that you definitely don't have the same level of like NBA personalities and stuff like that, which I think is where it really shines, is you actually sort of know what these players are like in the NBA, the superstars. You know their interests off the court, and a lot of them do have a lot of vast interests and stuff like that. So it's actually one of those things I think about quite a lot, and how this sort of balances and how it works. But there's good and there's bad. I don't know. I could go on a lot further, but we probably ought to get into some other stuff as well.
I think everything gets very interesting when you start to think about New Zealand rugby and how the contracts are set up there, and the options available to all players, because it's only someone like Bonan Barrett who has the leverage to do what he does. And then you start to think about the lower levels, and I just wonder how the players in those lower levels are going to start to tap into their own power in that contract structure, which is very interesting. And from a player's perspective, the being centrally contracted and stuff like that, I don't know how beneficial that is to the players. So it could be interesting to see how that moves down the track. And just on the Blake Green thing, we will get to the Warriors later on, but thinking back to how Blake Green left the Manly Sea Eagles, and then there's been some stuff in the news that basically means nothing about Blake Green and what the owner said about Blake Green and Gerard Bell, and probably not being at the Warriors next season, which is completely fine. Perhaps a little bit of karma coming back around Blake Green's way, considering how he left Manly Sea Eagles and what he's dealing with now. Like, what he's dealing with now isn't even close to the maneuvers him and his agent, Isaac Moses, pulled to get Blake Green out of the Manly Sea Eagles. So keep that in mind if you're seeing stuff around Blake Green at the moment. He doesn't have much of a basis to form an argument against the comments of the owner and his standing at the Warriors, considering how he left the Manly Seagulls, which was a absolute shit show. You can dive into some archives and read about that. Let's move into the NBL wildcard, where the Franklin Bulls are doing a great job. They're leading the NBL. I think they had a loss to might have been the Mountaineers, the Taranaki Mountaineers, a couple of days ago, but they got back on track and they are first. They're 5-3 from 8 games. Then you got the Manawatu Jets and the Taranaki Mountaineers. They're in 4-3 from 7 games. So shout out to the Franklin Bulls. However, they are the only team who has played 8 games at the top of the NBL ladder as well. So as the schedule evens out, it'll be interesting to see how they sit on the ladder. I watched a lot of Marcel Jones. I think that was in the game against Franklin Bulls, and Marcel Jones caught the eye. Did a little Google search of him. He's American from California, but he's come to the NBL for a few years now, and his combination with Dorona Rokawa is pretty amazing. Similar style to the Ngātai. What's the other bloke's name?
Jared Kenny.
Jared Kenny and Jordan Ngātai for the Otago Nuggets. We've got Jaden Bazant. He's leading the average points at the moment. So you got Jaden Bazant, 22.7 points. Dorona Rokawa, 22.3 points. Tom Vadonovich, 21.6 points. Taylor Britt with the Canterbury Rams, 20.9. Jordan Ngātai is 5th, 19.5. Marcel Jones, 19.3. And then you look at some of these other names like Michael Karena. I've seen him play a few games. Nice big man down low. 18.8 points. Isaac Davison, who I've talked about before, like that's the cream of the crop in the NBL, isn't it? Wildcard. Just looking at some of those names, the only bloke who is blatantly like cream of the crop, not in that top for the points, is Jared Kenny, but perhaps a different role for him. How do you view that kind of cream of the crop and where they fit into the tournament at the moment? I did do a little research on Jaden Bazant. He played for a Div 2 school in America for like 3 or 4 years. So he just spent his whole college time playing Div 2 basketball in America, which is great for him. So he's another one. There's like this, I'm just amazed at like the low-key talent in basketball in Aotearoa Wildcard. Like not everyone knows about the Steven Adams, but then when you start to like dig into some of these other dudes, a lot of them have been to college in America, have played professionally, learning about guys like, I think we're talking about Davidson and Taylor Britt getting game time and Jared Kenny getting game time in Australia with the NBL clubs. Like even that just happening is pretty damn impressive as well. So how do you just walk us through the leaders of the average points here wildcard and how you look like that's the cream of the crop right there, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a couple of the names you could probably slide in who just for various reasons haven't got the same roles. Like, I think Isaiah Marihuhu Leafa is another guy who's like, watching him for, where's he playing, the Huskies, he missed the first couple games, so he's lower on some of those stat things. He's sort of still working his way in, and just, man, but tell you what, as far as the eye test goes, that dude passes it instantly. Like, there's only a couple players, and they are these, like, cream of the crop type players who are absolutely, like, you watch them and you just know, like, this dude's going places. There's a few. When we talk about our top, we do our little top 5 lists of post-pandemic sort of power ranking type things later on. I've got a bit on like sort of players in that similar sort of role as a couple. I won't spoil it too much further, but yeah, like as far as the table goes, I'll say, because I think this is where the context comes in for these top players, sort of like the fellas leading the way. I don't know that the table really means anything at all. Like what we've seen so far is like just recording before the Thursday night games here. There's 3 wins between the first team and the bottom team is the Huskies, who currently have played 2 fewer games. So like they win both those games, get up to an even record, and then there's really just nothing in it. And we've seen enough to see that like night to night, there's no reason why a like the first place team wouldn't necessarily the bottom place team wouldn't necessarily beat the top place team. Like there's just been enough fluctuation to where, and there's reasons for that too. Like there's some of these teams are sort of figuring it out on the fly. I think you saw Franklin Bulls are actually a very good example, because I think they definitely lost their first game. I think they might have lost their first two, and then they went winning like 4 out of 5 or something, or 5 out of 6, I think, since then. And obviously they're a new franchise. They're a expansion team coming in to replace the previous Auckland incarnation that was there, just to keep an Auckland presence in there. Then the Huskies popped up after them as well, so there's 2 Auckland teams in there at the moment. And the Bulls have, like, they're a good example of a team that's getting better as they go along and figuring out combinations and getting players together, whereas like the Canterbury Rams, for example, started red hot. They had a lot of players who they'd drafted who were like existing players over the last few years with this team. Combinations were already there, but they've also had a lot of injuries. They lost Jack Salt and Joe Cook Green as well, so 2 of their top 3 draft picks. Taylor Britt's been absolutely outstanding for them, but they're a little bit of a one-man team. Like when Taylor Britt sits down, they look pretty bad, and they got pumped by the Bulls last night, wasn't it? 25 points in the end there. So they're a team who like started quite well with those combinations, and now maybe things are catching up to them as the other teams like close the gap on that initial advantage they have, and then they're forced to play with more of their depth than other teams, and you're seeing a sort of they started one place, they're going in the other direction perhaps. But even still, you wouldn't count them out in any individual game, because, for example, Taylor Britt is excellent, and they got a few other players who can, make shots and do what they need to do. So the league is extremely close, and that's probably the design of a draft league. And like everyone makes the playoffs at the end of the day. The seeding does matter in terms of like how tough it might be for you, like how many games you got to keep winning in this notoriously like toss a coin kind of thing for the results league. So it does matter, but it doesn't matter immensely. And so it's I'm sort of trying to figure out how that's going, like watching some of the games last night and wondering like, okay, so the table doesn't matter a massive amount. So what will be the difference? And I guess it is those teams that can get those combinations between not just their best player, but their best 2 or 3 players. And Franklin is a good example of how they're sort of figuring things out at the moment. And there's a lot of, there's a lot of, I don't know, I was going to say the fluctuation again, but I already made that point, so I don't need to repeat myself. But yeah, there's a lot of that, and it's tricky to figure out. So I've just sort of been like popping the tally on to watch these games, not really worrying at all about results yet. Like once the playoff starts, I'll pay attention then, but I'm just sort of like watching individual players. Like last night I was watching Isaac Davidson play absolutely outstanding. And fellas like that, Daron Rokara's been just brilliant to watch the whole time. Jaden Bazant, Tom Vodanovic hitting 3-pointers all over the show. Vodanovic is shooting 44.8% from 3, and he's basically a big man. I just did not realize he had that kind of, anyway, it's some range. I didn't realize he had that kind of like accurate range. He's been intense, and there's a lot of dudes in that thing. I actually kind of feel like I'm waiting for Jordan Natai to step it up just a little bit more as the first overall draft pick, and I think the Nuggets are going to need him to do that, because Jared Kenny isn't really a scorer. He should be more of a scorer as a point guard, but like Rawi Natai's stats here, 19.5 points per game, field goal percentage of 38.5 though, which is the lowest. Like, he's the only guy in the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Only guy in the top 9 shooting under 43%. So there's a little bit of a clue as to what the Nuggets can do to get better. Just got to get their best player hitting his shots a little bit more often. That's probably tricky for him, because he's the kind of guy who's going to get a lot of extra defensive attention as well. Yeah, I don't know. I could roll through a lot of these names just over and over, but we probably don't need to. Like Hiram Harris been pretty good. Tane Murray is a dude in a slightly different position as well, where he's pre-college, sort of trying to get his name out there a little bit more. I'm sure he's already got some sort of idea of where he'll end up, but he's a dude who's impressing a lot of people. Yeah, I'm just looking at the top scoring thing. I don't need to go through them all though. It's been well, I was going to say I don't know about you, but I do know about you because you already said it. It's just been fun having this stuff on, eh? Like, it's just something to watch in the evening, and it's not too intense, but it's interesting. There's a little bit of just something with just from the various players on offer, the talent that's happening, like just the way this competition's been structured and the way it's being undertaken. It's been a real sort of a real entertaining, real enjoyable just addition to the sporting landscape at the moment, eh? Sort of like post-pandemic, not a lot else going on, but there's a decent game of basketball, or two decent games of basketball on basically every night.
There definitely is, and just bouncing off that, the Franklin Bulls only have one scorer in the top 10 for average points, and that is Isaac Davidson. Otago Nuggets only have one dude in the top 10 for average points as well, and that's Jordan Ngatai. And who else is there? Taranaki have Rokawa and Marcel Jones. Watching Marcel Jones has been very interesting. That dude is everywhere. Like, he's getting rebounds, he can shoot, he grabs assists as well. Little tandem with Rokawa. Loving the work of Marcel Jones. And
he actually leads the league in rebounds, 14.6 per game.
He does. And then Hiram Harris, who was another interesting player, but he hasn't played since the 1st of July. And who has he played for? Manawatu. Where are they on the old ladder Wildcard?
Second.
They're
so doing all right.
Manawatu have done pretty well without Hiram Harris, but I'm not sure. How do you know if Hiram Harris he looks pretty young. Like, must be early 20s. And those 4 games, he had a massive impact on competition. Like, so in order, first to fourth game, 9 points, 11 points, 18 points, 18 points, rebounds, 10 rebounds, 19 rebounds, 14 rebounds, 9 rebounds. Big minutes in all those games as well. He's someone who is looking pretty damn good. This may be a good time wildcard because I think we both have a couple of NBL factors in our top 5 for post-pandemic efforts. So this will flow into that top 5 post-pandemic efforts. We'll just start with, like, where does the NBL sit in your eyes? I've got the NBL. I think the entire competition is 1 or 2 in my rankings. So I'm not sure if you've got, like, players within that who have made the most of this opportunity. Like, Hiram Harris is one of them, but he's only played 4 games. Someone like Jaden Bazant, who's just coming back from college in America, is putting himself front and center for everyone to see. Obviously, Tom Vodonovich is doing pretty well. Do you have, like, any thoughts there on whether it's the NBL competition itself or specific players who have caught your eye the most in terms of coming back post-pandemic and taking this opportunity and just running with it to no end?
Yeah, so do we want to do our, like, little power ranking things now? Should we just do the whole 5 kind of thing?
We sure can. I'll just drop mine. We
could do the old Zach Lowe thing, like 5-5, then 4-4, 3-3, or just do individual lists and whatever, or I don't know how we do.
All right, give me number 5 for you, wildcard.
Okay, number 5 for me is Mr. Joe Bell, Kiwi footballer playing at a club called Viking in Norway. This is, I think, with most of these, there's 1, maybe 2 where you might say, like, the pandemic had some sort of impact. Mostly I'm just saying these are sort of things that I think were inevitable either way. These kind of, like, post-pandemic rises, they were delayed because of the pandemic, but they would have happened one way or another. Joe Bell is an outstanding footballer, going to be at the heart of the All Whites midfield for the next decade and beyond, hopefully. really has a chance at playing at quite a big club as well down the line. He's starting off his professional career in Norway on the bench first couple games. Does nice enough. Team's struggling. They put him in. He's been played every minute since then of the last 3 or 4 games. He's set up at least 1 goal. Could have set up a couple more if his fellas were a little better at finishing. He's come close to scoring once or twice. He's winning a lot of fans in Norway. It's not the highest, level that a Kiwi footballer is playing at, but it's pretty bloody high for a first professional contract. I think he's done excellently so far. I think he's going to go on to incredible things. I love watching him play football. Sounds like they love watching him play football in Norway as well. So I've got him at number 5.
Rightio. Shout out Joe Bell. My number 5 is Eugene Beerman.
Nice.
And
yeah, nice.
He is number 5 because Dan Hooker lost the fight. And the Alex Volkanovski fight hasn't happened yet. So I can't put Eugene Beerman higher because, he hasn't got the result that would take him higher. But the simple fact that Eugene Beerman went to Las Vegas, cornered Dan Hooker, and then went straight from Las Vegas to the United Arab Emirates, where he's now going to corner Alex Volkanovski. Dan Hooker fought Dustin Poirier, and that's a top 5 matchup. And now Volkanovski is defending his title bout in a rematch against Max Holloway. So those are 2 fights at the very top of those divisions, and Eugene Beerman has been there for both fighters, and I'll take it further and I'll say the City Kickboxing coaching staff, because in Las Vegas you had Eugene Beerman, Mike Angrove, and Andre Paulette. Then now in the UAE, you've got Eugene Beerman and Brad Riddell from City Kickboxing. Frank Hickman is a wrestling coach with Tiger Muay Thai who is affiliated with City Kickboxing. And then you've got Volkanovski's Australian coach, Joe Lopez, there as well. So that's effectively 5 City Kickboxing coaches who have had to go through the whole quarantines and testing alongside their fighters. So as far as a lot of this stems from the fact that the UFC did get back into motion, has put on events, and that's great. But the City Kickboxing coaching staff have done an amazing job in supporting their fighters, preparing their fighters, and being there for their fighters as well. So Eugene Beerman and the entire City Kickboxing coaching staff have definitely performed above and beyond coming out of the pandemic. Who's your number 4 there, Wildcard?
Beauty, yeah. I just on that note, I didn't have her on my list, and most people know this by now as well, but I will just chuck out that constant reminder that Eugene Beerman's sister is Sarai Beerman, who is the I forget what the exact title is, but she's basically the head of women's football at FIFA, reporting directly to the deputy secretary and all that, and that is a factor that will come up right near the end. Little teaser, right near the end of my top 5 list here when we talk about, because of course the Women's World Cup is also coming to New Zealand and Australia, just quietly, in 2023. That's just been announced. Obviously, Beerman didn't have anything to do with that, but she will have a good part to do with the steps moving forward, planning for that World Cup. So just chuck that one out there. But as far as number 4 on my list goes, stepping into the NRL realms here, I considered having Tohu Harris because I just think he's been absolutely outstanding for the Warriors since they've come back. But the Warriors haven't been absolutely outstanding. Not as bad as I think people like. They have actually gone 3-3 since the restart. It's not the worst run of form they could have had. Granted, the teams they've beaten have been teams generally in just absolutely terrible positions. It was the Dragons at rock bottom, the Broncos at rock bottom, who was the other team? The Cowboys, when Taumalolo was playing half injured. So, grain of salt and all that, and that's why I didn't include Harris. Instead, I've chucked out Dylan Brown, who, starting every week, playing outstandingly well. Every time I watch him play, he impresses. For the Parramatta Eels, top of the table at the on the NRL as it currently stands. A little bit of question marks as to whether I think they can legitimately, I think they're in with a shot at winning the championship. I wouldn't go betting on it or anything, because I think you just got to, with those, we all know the playoffs are a little bit of a different game than the regular season, and you sort of fall back on the teams with the experience, the Roosters, the Storm, etc., when it comes to those sort of right in the swimming in the deep waters and whatever. But the Eels have been really good. Dylan Brown's been outstanding. He's obviously going to be a superstar for the Kiwis down the line as well, and he's a Northlander, so I've got him at number 4.
Pick it up, Dylan Brown. Definitely. I've just spent the last week thinking about the Aotearoa Kiwis, and I'm going to write about this at some stage, but there's a young wave coming through, and I've talked a lot about the golden era of Kiwi football, Wildcard. I think rugby league may be approaching that with the Kiwis, considering the young talent. Dylan Brown's a certified almost superstar, and him and Shawn Johnson in the halves for the Kiwis could be rather crazy, along with forward
tantalizing.
Those two playing behind Brandon Smith, Nelson Asafa Solomona, James Fisher Harris, Braden Hamlin Yoeli, Marata Niokori. Woo-wee. My number 4, I've gone into your Terry. I've got Abby Erceg. North Carolina have won their first 3 games coming back from the pandemic, in the, what was it again, Wildcard, the NWUSL.
The NWSL Challenge Cup.
Rightio, shout out to that. Abby Erceg, 3 from 3. She's the captain of that team, am I correct, Wildcard?
Certainly are. She also scored the winning goal in their last game too.
There we have it, even deeper. Now, they are the only team who has won 2 games. They've won all 3. Second is the Houston Dash. They've had a win and a draw. So they've only played the 2 games, but they haven't got 2 wins. The only team with 2 wins is the North Carolina Courage, and Abby Erceg captains that fucking team. So shout out to Abby Erceg, doing massive things over in the USA. I imagine she's somewhere in your top 5, Wildcard.
Yeah, she is. You'll hear her name again in a few minutes as well.
Right, yeah. Well, you can slide into number 3 territory here.
Certainly can. Number 3, I don't really have anything to say about this, no explanations or whatever, because I don't care enough about rugby to do that, but I've got the Auckland Blues.
Very interesting. Very interesting that you chose the Auckland Blues, because I went a step further. Same spot, number 3. I've gone a bit more specific, and I am going with Hoskins Sotutu, who has just exploded in Super Rugby Aotearoa. The Blues have been very good, and that is largely due to Hoskins Sotutu playing in that forward pack, and thinking, I'm not sitting here giving Super Rugby too much thought, but when I am watching a bit of Super Rugby, when I am thinking about rugby in Aotearoa, I am struggling to think of a player who has had such an impact coming out of the pandemic as Hoskins Sotutu, and it's undeniable stocks up for Sotutu. You would have to agree there, Wildcard.
Absolutely, it's going to be real awkward when he starts playing for England, eh?
Is he going to play for England?
Probably not. Apparently he's eligible through his mother, though. He can also play for Fiji, obviously, and then there's that big old black jersey waiting for him sooner rather than later if he wishes, I would imagine as well. I mean, was he much of a, I was going to say known name, but he is a, his name is known, bit of, heritage and all that, but, was he a player on the radar before the before the pandemic in the same way? Because he really does seem to be one who sort of has just, I don't know, I don't follow rugby closely enough to be aware of these things, but he does seem like a dude who's just emerged fully formed since the pandemic.
Well, he's been keeping Akira Ioane out of the team for a while, and I think he was doing that prior to the pandemic as well. There is a video, I think, somewhere of him playing on the wing for Sacred Heart, which I'll just have a quick squiz and see if that's true. I'm not too in tune with like where he would, like, obviously in the same way that I know all the Kiwi Rugby League prospects who aren't playing NRL. I'm sure some rugby heads out there knew Hoskins Sotutu before he played Super Rugby, and obviously would have believed that he was going to be a massive factor. But yeah, just he's everywhere. He's everywhere for the Blues, and he is... I can't imagine anyone thought he would have this impact in Super Rugby. Just being one of the most dynamic, mobile, loose forwards in the competition and impacting. Like, it's one thing to be like no disrespect to Jason Taumalolo, but it's one thing to be a Jason Taumalolo putting up massive numbers when your team is losing a fair bit. It's another thing to be impacting a game in a winning team, and that difference between being in a losing team and a winning team changes the whole discussion around a player, and it's rather blatant at this stage that Hoskins Sotutu is having a massive impact on the Blues, maybe a far greater impact than, because everyone looks at the Blues, you think of flashy players, you think of all their first fives that they have on their squad list at the moment, you think of the Bowden Barrett, Dan Carter playing together, you think of all these, the Awani brothers and all that. The Blues at the moment just have like a super hearty forward pack that is doing a great job, and guys like Tui Piloto who are excessively mobile, skillful, massive, and I think it's a defining factor in the Blues coming out of that pandemic and being rather impressive. So you had the Blues number 3, I had Sotutu himself. Number 2, Wildcard, who you got there?
Number 2 is where we swing it back around to what we were talking about earlier, because number 2, I have got post-college NBL players, just sort of in a general grouping of them. Guys like Jaden Pazant is one, Isaiah Leafa is another one. Who else do we have on that list? Old mate Davidson as well, Isaac Davidson. There's probably a couple. Sam Timmins would be another one. There's probably a couple others I'm not thinking off the top of my head here, but just dudes who are coming in and just like not just settling in for like happy to be there kind of thing. The guys who are coming in and actually really dominating games, and they've been away from New Zealand for a couple of years, or at least away from that sort of New Zealand scene, playing college ball, coming back, massively improved, a lot of them basically. Not only massively improved, but also like desperate to show how much they've improved, and they're doing exactly that in this league. With it, also just happens to have a format which is allowing them to do that, because you don't have the import players more or less coming in, sort of like taking all the big clutch shots and stuff. You've actually got these guys like up and coming Kiwi ballers out there getting the opportunity to not just play big minutes, but to play big minutes as dominant players, and it's been incredibly enjoyable to watch. And I've, bloody loved every minute of some of, like, Leafa and Davidson are the two guys who in the last couple of days I've watched them, and with, like, my jaw hanging down multiple times during games, just watching, like, the shot-making ability, just how clean their game is, just some of the passing. There was a pass that Leafa made, I think in their most recent game, where he's, like, it was like a fast break, he's coming over half court, and he sort of, like, did that, kind of sidearm bounce pass, just fired it in so his dude run into the hoop. It's like, that's just an amazing play right there. And we're seeing that multiple times again with some of these dudes. And it just seems like there's a bit of a pattern as well with this particular core of players coming back from college with something to prove, and they're bloody proving it.
Proving it they are. You went with Dylan Brown earlier in your picks. Number 2, I'm going to go with Shawn Johnson. He is still first in try assists. Doesn't quite have the gap between Shawn Johnson's try assists and the Warriors' tries has got a bit bigger, because the Warriors scored a few tries recently. But But I'm still keeping an eye on that, whether Shawn Johnson can have more assists than Warriors tries, which would be not possible, but it's a cool thing to keep a tab on. Things didn't start so well, though, because the Sharks lost their first 2 games prior to the pandemic. Then they lost to the West Tigers in returning, defeated the Cowboys, then lost to the Dragons, and then they went on a little winning spree. Not the hardest schedule. Bulldogs, Sea Eagles without Tommy Trebojevic, I think, and then the Titans. But coming out of the pandemic, the Sharks are 4-2 from their 6 games. Shawn Johnson is currently leading all in try assists, and the first 2 games he only had 2 try assists. That was in the first game against the Rabbitohs. Then Shawn Johnson, since round 4, Shawn Johnson has had 3 try assists versus the Cowboys, 1 try assist versus the Dragons, and then he's had 2, 2, and 2. So he's had at least 2 try assists in his last 3 games, and he is leading the Sharks to victories. But I think, regardless of how the Sharks are performing, regardless of their strength of schedule, the fact that Shawn Johnson is leading all try assists in the NRL at this stage, and not a super defining stat here, but Shawn Johnson is still averaging the most running meters of any season this year. This is the only season since he made his debut in 2011 in which Shawn Johnson is averaging over 80 running meters per game. And that, along with the try assists, I think everyone is waiting for Shawn Johnson to fuck up. Everyone's waiting for Shawn Johnson to do the classic old, he fades in and out of games, he doesn't impact or control the game, and he's not doing 5 steps and then scoring tries and all that. I do have a couple of more screenshots of Shawn Johnson's try assists in the email for tomorrow. That's something I'm following. But just the fact that Shawn Johnson is leading the try assists, the fact that Shawn Johnson also, to a lesser extent, is averaging the most run meters coming out of the pandemic. And Chad Townsend had an interview with Chad Townsend does great YouTube content. Shout out to him. He had an interview with Jaden Brayley, who's the hooker, and Toby Rudolph. And Toby Rudolph seems like a lovely guy. He's so funny. Very interesting dude. But he's definitely staying at the Sharks. He's not coming to the Warriors. He's definitely staying at the Sharks because, and I say that because there's a vibe around the Sharks at the moment. Evident in Shawn Johnson's play, he just looks like he's having fun. He looks like he's enjoying his footy. That's showing on the park. And Shawn Johnson is my number 2. He's been fantastic coming out of the pandemic.
Yeah, love that. I'm going to go sort of big picture theoretical for half a second here about Shawn Johnson, because there's a thing I wrote about in the email newsletter at the start of the week about how much I sort of kept it a little bit vague, but generally about how much the sort of narratives and the stories that we hear about players are not in the control of those players themselves. They're not the ones telling those stories, and Shawn Johnson is just a great example of someone for whom the media perception of him, the fan perception in a lot of ways as well, and just the general, if you ask a random person on the street who is a sort of cursory NRL fan, they might have a idea about Shawn Johnson built off of those kind of things, which just isn't reflective of the way he's playing and what he's doing for the Sharks right now. It's not the right story, and it's I guess when you talk about back to the start as well, we're talking about player empowerment a little bit. Chad Townsend taking control of some of that storytelling, some of that explanation type stuff, exposing a bit of his own personality and letting people know him in that way is a very good example of a player taking control of their story and of stories of their teammates as well, who get to pop up and hang out with that kind of thing. And yeah, Shawn Johnson's definitely due a fair bit of that. It also reminds me a little bit of that David Lynch quote too, actually, at the start. Meditation makes you more you, right? And I I think there's I think it might have been Ram Dass had a quote like, "Who are you when you stop believing the stories that you tell about yourself?" I think that's another example that sort of wraps into that. Like, if you take away the things which you like, the what would you call it? Just like the things you believe that aren't necessarily true, like the assumptions and those kind of things. You strip all that back. Who are you at that point? It's like, who is Shawn Johnson as well? In that same logic, if you strip back the perception people have about him and just look at him like, if he changed his name and was a different player, like let's say he was a new signing from, I don't know, Super League or something like that, playing the way he is, would the perception about him be different? Probably, eh?
Shawn Johnson actually has his own vlogs as well, so obviously
beautiful.
He's close with Chad Townsend. People forget they played together at the Warriors, so they already have a relationship. They're already friends. They know each other's games pretty well. So that's scope for improvement with the Sharks. Like, things can get better for their combination as well. But everything you said about Chad Townsend there also applies to Shawn Johnson, because Shawn Johnson has taken on a lot of that influence from Chad Townsend, and he's doing his own vlogs and he's controlling his narrative as well, which is very interesting. Did you drop your number 2, or are you up to your number 1 now?
Yeah, number 2 was post-college NBL players. So Joe Bell, Dylan Brown, Auckland Blues, post-college. And numero uno is, I mean, you can piece this one together based on hints already. It's Abby Erceg. Abby Erceg, who we already talked about a little bit, just playing absolutely outstandingly for the best team in the American women's football competition. Some of the sort of traditional rivals that they've had, Portland, for example, Chicago, haven't looked quite as good in this little sort of mini tournament thing that they're doing. They just haven't looked as sharp as they have been. So it kind of feels like North Carolina, who've just picked up where they left off, have, if anything, expanded the gap between themselves and the chasing pack. Abby Erceg, massive part of that. The reason I had her at number 1, because this is all just stuff she does every week. Like, she's always dominating for that team, always being an incredible leader and all that. The reason I've nudged her up to number 1 as well is because it's also representative of what I think is probably the biggest bit of like sports news that's happened in New Zealand, which is getting the co-hosting rights to the 2023 Women's World Cup. And I wrote a little bit about that yesterday as well, just really like trying to hammer home the fact that this is a very, very, very big deal. It's an enormous tournament, and it is going to be co-hosted in New Zealand and Australia. And I think all Kiwi women's football is going to benefit from that in some way, from the, 4-year-olds playing for the very first time all the way up to, ex-players who suddenly their legacies look a little bit, get a little bit more context around them and stuff like that. Like, just all points in between. And so I've also decided to put Abby Erceg, just nudge her up to first, because of the excellent play that she brings out every game for North Carolina and whatever, but also as a representative of the wider Kiwi female football scene. Or chuck it to you for number 1 as well. But I will say, I also did a bottom 5 if you want to hear that afterwards, just sneakily while I was trying to figure these out. But let's go your number 1 first.
My number 1 is the NBL, but more specifically Tom Vodanovic. He is currently 3rd in points and 3rd in total rebounds averages there. But it's also just like I just enjoy watching him play. As you said, he shoots the 3-pointer pretty well. Aotearoa is the land of, it's kind of power forward or guard. Those are the 2 positions you play in New Zealand basketball. Like, you don't have the massive center, and all the power forwards that we have are like NBA wing size. So it's a bit of a, like, I can just imagine, NBA kind of people coming here and just looking at the bodies and shit like that and just being like, what the fuck's going on here? But it is Aotearoa, and, we got our ways of operation, we got our ways of doing stuff. And I think Tom Vodanovic sums that all up nicely. He's a pretty big lad. He's a bit rugged, bit ruthless, but he has skills. Just check his assists there. He's not in the top 10 for average assists, but he can He can pass it, right, Wildcard?
He certainly can. His average assists, he's getting 2.7 per game. But the game last night, I think he was only 1 assist shy of a triple-double. So he certainly can pass the ball if he needs to. I wouldn't say it's the skill set that that stands out for him, but it's certainly, like, not one of them ones you want to sleep on with a fellow like Vodanovic.
And then on top of that, the reason, well, it's kind of crazy for me to single out Tom Vodanovic as my number one in that NBL bubble, but the reason I have him number one is because his performances in the NBL and his presence in the NBL then led me to thinking about some Tall Black stuff and thinking about, possible lineups that you could see for the Tall Blacks, and I think Tom Vodanovic is going to be a key instrumental figure in Tall Blacks basketball moving forward. And when you start to think about the players who can fit around a player like Tom Vodanovic, as you said, he shoots the three-pointer well, but he's a big dude, so you're stretching the floor there, and you're creating space for maybe a player like Steven Adams, or you're, helping the veteran guys who aren't involved in the NBL right now. Obviously, Steven Adams' thought is a long shot, but just the thought of it was pretty exciting. But there's a lot of Tall Blacks who aren't playing in the NBL right now. And just thinking about how Tom Vodanovic fits into a Tall Blacks team and the talent around him, I think as far as like boosting your stocks up and bumping your stocks up in your sports and your reputation, your mana, I think Tom Vodanovic has done a fantastic job during the NBL. And he's the one sparking that thought in my mind. So shout out to him. You can bounce off that and then get into whatever your worst top 5 thing is.
Yeah, whatever the opposite of a power ranking is. Tom Vodanovic also, I notice, pretty relatively comfortable lead at the top in offensive rebounds as well. So he's been rebounding well, but he's also been rebounding at the offensive end particularly well, which is pretty, especially that's part of the reason why they've been able to do okay the last couple games where Hiram Harris has been injured, and I think he's close to coming back. I think he was sort of not quite a game time decision, but getting there. I did a quick Twitter search earlier, but Vodanovic, I mean, you could, with that rebounding ability, you could play him at center for sure. You could have him as a stretch 5 type player. He's a little undersized at an international level, maybe, at least against at a major tournament. He's probably he'd be on the edge of a squad for that kind of thing. Wouldn't have made it a year or two ago. Maybe would be pushing close to that now. Interesting to see what he does now, because obviously also he's been released from the Breakers, one of a number of guys off contract since last season too.
Well, it's just so we laid out post contact meters in the NRL. I think this is an important thing because it just helps people visualize it. You literally think, okay, I make contact, and then how many meters after that contact am I making? And you can start to visualize it. You can start to imagine yourself, okay, I make contact and I get no meters. That's not very good. I make contact and I can make 4 to 5 meters. That is excellent. You can picture yourself in that motion and visualize that statistic. With someone who is shooting well at the 3-point line and then is also getting offensive rebounds, you can visualize that. You can visualize someone who is out on the 3-point line creating space, but then is also getting to the hoop to get those offensive rebounds, as opposed to just someone at the defensive end. You would expect someone like Tom Vodanovic to get a lot of defensive rebounds because he's probably going to be near the hoop, marking the opposition big man more often than not. So that's cool. But then when you start to visualize, okay, he's shooting the 3-pointer really well, but he's also getting a lot of offensive rebounds, you can put yourself into that situation and start to visualize how those two statistics match up, and I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, because offensive rebounds really is I mean, it's a hustle stat, isn't it? Because, like, the defensive rebounds, like you say, that comes from structure. That comes from boxing out, making sure you, like, seal those, like, missed shots, get those possessions. But offensive rebounds, a lot of teams don't bother with them. There are coaches out there who will say, like, okay, if it bounces your way, sweet as, go get the ball. But you don't have to, like, attack the rim for those missed shots, because we don't want to overcommit and then get caught on the break and give up an easy two, like coming back the other way. So there's that factor to thing. And then also that's obviously a thing that he's like working hard. He's going above and beyond to get those, because you don't lead the league in offensive rebounds accidentally. And that hustle thing is another one of sort of like what you're saying about kind of like, there's a little bit of a maybe stereotypical isn't the right, but there's a little bit of a pattern maybe to the type of players that we've got in this NBL. You're not seeing a lot of 7-footers out there, right? So they're guys like Vodanovic, who will be playing a lot of sort of like big man type minutes here, but maybe pushing up into an NBL, like an Australian NBL context. I can't remember where he played most of his minutes for the Breakers last year. He didn't get a lot of minutes full stop, which is part of the issue. But he can certainly he'd probably be looking at more of like power forward type thing. Although even then, like, is he? I don't know. It's tricky with some of these guys. Like, they're sort of capped athletically. You might say he's not athletic enough to be a power forward, but not tall enough to be a center. But in a league like this, he's absolutely going to dominate. And if he's got that kind of like hustle to his game, well, that's how you make the most of that when you don't necessarily have the perfect ideal like body shape for, like, you sort of maybe caught in between a couple positions where you just do a bit of everything and do a bit of both. And also, let's chuck out the fact that Steven Adams, the most influential New Zealand basketballer ever, and that we've ever had, he has made his game on being a master offensive rebounder as well. As one of the key aspects of his obviously, I think he had more offensive rebounds than defensive ones in the last year that Russell Westbrook was in town. It's not a coincidence, but yeah, I love what Tom Vodanovic is doing, and I think that does feed into a lot of the kind of, like, you do see a lot of those kind of like would you call them like combo forwards? I don't know. Sort of that type of player doing very well. Like, there's not a massive amount of size, so you get a lot of like sort of energy and that kind of thing, leading to the way teams are rebounding and things like that, which is, yeah, it's actually part of the reason why it's been very enjoyable to watch as well, because there's not a lot of like there's a lot of like emphasis on players just doing their thing to help the team, rather than the team sitting within a structure and relying on the structure kind of thing. It does make for more exciting basketball, I think. I'll do this little top 5, bottom 5. I'll do this little bottom 5 thing nice and quickly. I won't waste too much time on it, so we can talk a bit about the Warriors as well. But I did scribble it down while I was thinking about my top 5 last night. Number 5, I've got Joseph Parker, just because he borderline won the actual pandemic, the actual lockdown, with his lovely little videos, and everyone enjoyed that, and sort of boosted his reputation a lot overseas as well, I think, and he was really well poised to come out of lockdown and do great things. And then you haven't really heard of anything from him in the last 6 weeks. Like, there's that Lucas Brown fight that doesn't seem like it's going to happen. There's some other unbeaten Aussie up-and-coming heavyweight who's chucking his name in the ring. There was talk about Junior Farr, which they don't seem to quite want at this point, which I understand, but at the same time, like, he doesn't seem to have a lot of other options. It's just been frustrating how little we've heard from Joseph Parker. It's just, he could have come out and had a fight like lined up by now, which would have kept him right, like just carried on the momentum that he had through lockdown, and I don't think we've really seen that. Doesn't necessarily mean he's going to go backwards when he does get back into it. It just means that I'm not sure they've maximum capitalized on things, circumstances being what they are. Number 4, I've got Ellie Riley, who was poised to, like, I mentioned this on the last podcast, actually. Like, she had a great career in Sweden, moved to Chelsea to challenge herself, couldn't get enough minutes, so she moved to Bayern Munich, where she couldn't get enough minutes, so she moved to Orlando Pride to play in the NWSL for the first time. which was great vibes and everything, except then Orlando Pride had a COVID outbreak and then they had to withdraw from the tournament, and now she's left that club to just go hang out in Sweden for a while with her partner, and just generally disappointing that things just have not quite worked out for the Football Ferns captain on a club level for the last couple of years. She's been at some big-ass clubs, just hasn't quite got the influence and the minutes that she deserves and would like. So it goes. Number 3, I've got Stephen Kearney for obvious reasons, although you could always flip that the other way around and say he got the hell out of the Warriors, so maybe he's actually a winner in this situation. Number 2, I've got Sean Marks, Brooklyn Nets, all the feel-good stuff that they've had over the last few years and the way he's done incredible work to turn them around. Getting into that superstar era, and we've had some wonkiness this season. The firing of Kenny Atkinson, it's sort of one of those something had to give situations, so I don't necessarily blame Sean Marks for that. And I don't necessarily think they're in a terrible place moving forward, but as far as this restart goes, Kyrie Irving's injured, Kevin Durant's still injured, neither of them are going to play. They were hopeful that the long break might give them enough time, Durant especially, but neither of them are quite ready yet to play, so they don't have their 2 best players. DeAndre Jordan's opted out, didn't want to play. Who else? Which is the 3 boys right there, eh? The 3 free agency signings there. Spencer Dinwiddie got the virus and he wanted to play but hasn't been allowed to. I can't remember who the other 2 are, but there's 2 other players who opted out as well. So there's 6 of your top roster players who are not available going into this restarted NBA thing, and no team has been affected quite so badly or drastically as the Nets, who are going to actually have to sign about 4 new players just to fill out a roster now for this thing. Not in the best place that they could have been, the Brooklyn Nets, and a little bit awkward for Sean Marks, although at least he can say that their plan, like, this was never going to be the season, or next season was always going to be the one where they got to turn the switch and make things happen when Kevin Durant's back. And number 1 for the least, I'm not even sure what the title of this bottom 5 thing is, but number 1 for the worst post-pandemic, I've got Team New Zealand in the America's Cup for reasons that don't need to be explained, but for reasons which I will be honest and say that I can't help but laugh a little bit, because sailing is a very much of one of those kind of like, let's use the word privileged, a very, very privileged sport in our society and in New Zealand in general, and I think it's quite funny what's going on with some of the weirdness there about funding and all that kind of thing.
It's straight out of some sort of movie script, isn't it? Like, scams and whistleblowers.
Yeah,
and
Narcos or something like that.
It's all a bit crazy, but that was a beautiful, that was a very insightful, worst top 5 post-pandemic. That was very good, Wildcard, very good. I'll just do a little bit here on the Caribbean Premier League. So, 5 Kiwi cricketers are off to the Caribbean, and I'll list them. I'll provide a bit of context, and then you can quickly pick out 1 or 2 and just spin a yarn there. Then we'll get to the Warriors and we'll wrap this up. So, as far as bit unprepared here. The players involved, you got Ross Taylor, you have Ish Sodhi, Colin Munro, Glen Phillips, and Tim Seifert. Glen Phillips is back with the Jamaica Taliwars, where he has played the last 2 seasons. Ross Taylor is playing for Guyana Amazon Warriors. And then we have Colin Munro is... I don't know where, man. I'm having a mare. I do know Ish Sodhi's playing for St. Kitts and Nevis. And then Munro's locked in for the Trinbago, which is Trinidad and Tobago. And then you've got Seifert. Oh my God, I'm having a meal with...
Seifert's with Munro.
He's with Munro. There we go. So, as far as context for those players, for Ish Sodhi and Colin Munro, same situation for both of them. They didn't have a very good 2019, but they did have very good series earlier this year against India. So for them, Caribbean Premier League is about continuing their resurgence, their minor resurgence. Like, it's not a drastic resurgence, but it was a bit sketchy there ahead of that India series, just based on what they did in 2019. And remember, these are two players who are, at this stage, a lot of their Blackcaps work is in the 2020 international arena, and they are known T20 performers, but 2019 wasn't so good, and they bounced back strongly earlier this year against India. So for them, it's about continuation. Also continuation for Ross Taylor. This is a dude who is at the peak of his powers late in his career. Who knows, we might be in the middle of his career. Who knows? That's a fucking awesome thought. But Ross Taylor has been low-key excellent in T20 international cricket for the Blackcaps, middle order role, controlling the innings, bit of experience, and also so experience in the sense that I don't know if there's many T20 batsmen who have the confidence, the patience, the experience, the know-how to control the middle stages of a 2020 innings just with like rotating the strike, hitting enough boundaries, but keeping the runs flowing as you build into your innings, or from a team perspective, regain some control of that innings. Ross Taylor does a great job for the Blackcaps in that role. And for Guyana, he is also an experienced batsman who I can see playing a similar role. And that's just going to be double, triple down of Ross Taylor's excellence. So pretty excited for that. Tim Seifert's on the come up. And there's a crossover here between Tim Seifert and Glen Phillips, because Glen Phillips played his last T20 international late in 2018. And Tim Seifert played his first T20 international early in 2018. So Glen Phillips has fallen off the radar as far as Blackcaps T20 international cricket goes, which actually worked out pretty good because he made his test debut. Still got he's averaging 39 in first class cricket or something like that, 39.62, which is excellent. Scored a half century on test debut. So everything's worked out pretty good for Glen Phillips, but everyone views him as a swashbuckling batsman, and he hasn't been in the Blackcaps T20 team since the end of 2018, but he has been one of the best CPL batsmen over the last 3 years. So 2018, I think he finished second to Colin Munro in total runs, and then 2019, he finished fourth in total runs in the Caribbean Premier League with Jamaica. So Glen Phillips is perhaps the best positioned of all these players to do something good in the CPL once again. And as we look forward to like a T20 World Cup in the summer ahead, Glen Phillips is trying to get back into the Blackcaps T20 mix. Essentially competing with Tim Seifert, who he was another player, had a very good series against India, and is now, this is his first international tournament. So there's a weird relationship between Phillips and Seifert. Phillips has played a few international tournaments, primarily the CPL. But he lost his T20 spot to Tim Seifert, but Tim Seifert doesn't have that international experience, but Tim Seifert's the dude for the Blackcaps right now. So it's a bit of a fucking mess, but you've got two very good young up-and-coming batsmen who are looking to make a good impression in the CPL and put their best foot forward ahead of the Kiwi summer. So what tickles your toes the most in that little group there, Wildcard?
Well, the whole group tickles my toes, really, because I think that's a nice little core of players to watch play 2020 cricket. I think there's a lot of entertainment involved with those five fellas in particular. Ross Taylor, I mean, as far as like individuals go, I don't think there's anything Ross Taylor could do to alter anything about his place in the Blackcaps at this point, or his place just as a Kiwi cricketing legend or whatever. Like, Ross Taylor's just out there, I don't know, living his best life or whatever. So don't know that it really matters what he does there. I don't know that it matters enormously what Sodhi does either. Like, he has been established as a 2020 player, bounced around the other formats a lot over his career, but in 2020, like the last 4 years, he has been a first choice player alongside Mitchell Santner. Less of a competition there for him, so he's he's pretty well set. It would be good to see him get some good wickets. He's the only bowler of this quintet that's going to the CPL. But again, like, I don't know that it massively changes his fortunes either way, unless something absolutely drastic happens, and you don't really expect that necessarily. And even with Glen Phillips, he's dominated this level in the past, so you want to see him keep dominating things. He is keeping the pressure on the guys in the Blackcaps, but it really is that Trinbago. I hadn't heard that Trinbago thing. It's quite, I don't know. I have weird feelings about when people mix words up like that. I forget what you call it, but it's often quite tacky, but I'll just chuck out whatever that Trinbago twosome of Munro and Seifert. I think are comfortably the dudes to keep just the closest analytical eye on, because Munro obviously is at a point in his career where he's probably just a 2020 player moving forward, but he's still a first 11 2020 player. And there's supposed to be a 2020 World Cup in Australia in October. That's almost 99% certain not to happen at this point, I'd say. They will delay it. It will happen at some point, probably early next year. But there was also supposed to be another one next year in India, because they were going to have just another World T20 instead of a Champions Trophy. So I don't really know what's going on with that. It could have been just a golden time in Munro's career as his little maybe swan song, but he's young enough to keep going afterwards, especially if he does well. It could have just been a great sort of shining moment for him to find back his form. Couple World T20s in the space of maybe 18 or so months. I'm not sure what the timelines will be with any of those things yet. I think ICC is still waiting on a few of them moving pieces to settle down. But that does complicate things a little bit for Munro, because, we've seen this sort of slipping factor with him where he's fallen out of the ODI stuff. His 2020 form hasn't been as blistering as it was. He's had a little bit of a resurgence, but it only takes a couple bad series and suddenly he's in big trouble to lose that spot. If he loses that spot, then he's out of the picture altogether at that point. He's already lost his New Zealand cricket contract. So there is a little bit of a pressure on him, because it could easily go the other way as well. What I was saying about this little golden period for him, it could be if he finds some big form in the CPL, carries that into Blackcaps game, builds on what he did against India, and where he got some runs, but he wasn't quite the Munro we know. He wasn't quite the Munro that was picked to be this just swashbuckling master blast and opener kind of thing. Wasn't really that. He was a little more reserved within himself, showing a bit of the pressure of knowing that he needed to put a few scores up. But he did get some scores up, so hopefully that's the catalyst he needed. And Seifert's in a similar position at the other end of his career where I think he's established himself enough. I think we can comfortably say he's the first choice wicketkeeper in 2020 cricket for the Blackcaps, but he could do with just hammering that home a little bit more, just banging that nail in some more and saying I'm not here by default. I suppose I'm contractually obliged as a New Zealand cricket fan to say that Devon Conway's knocking at the door now, so there's another guy, not to mention Conway doesn't necessarily just get to skip ahead to the top of the queue, because there's a lot of other guys in Glen Phillips' position as well who are making their cases at Kiwi domestic level, so there's a lot of competition for those kind of places, and Seifert has done enough to hold that position, but I don't know that he's done enough to make it concrete. So him getting onto this level of overseas 2020 cricket type dude, going around the tournaments, is massive. That's exactly what he needed to do at this point of his career. So you want to see these two, Munro and Seifert, do extremely well in this tournament, and there's, I think, just a little bit more compared to the other three. I just think those two have a little bit more to lose or to gain from how their performances go in here, beyond just the performances themselves, you know what I mean?
For sure. Rightio, we'll just do a little bit here on the Warriors wildcard. They did manage to defeat the Brisbane Broncos last weekend, but boy oh boy, it was a nice encapsulation on how to implode over the course of 80 minutes. And while the Warriors were pretty good and hung in there, and there were a lot of superlatives used by the mainstream media here in Aotearoa in describing that effort by the Warriors, which were completely excessive. The Warriors just played well against a team that was eventually, by the 70th minute, rather terrible. So the Warriors got the job done there. This week they faced the Titans, and this is actually quite an interesting juncture for the Warriors, given the course of their 2020 season. It's so hard to write about the Warriors at the moment because the whole situation just makes it difficult, let alone the fact that there's players in the Warriors team who are just lone players. There are players in the Warriors team who knows what their futures are with the Warriors, and I don't know anymore. It's not about style for the Warriors. It's just about pure effort, attitude, intensity, and it's pretty hard to analyze effort, attitude, and intensity. You can see it or you can't. So breaking down how the Warriors play and trends that I see isn't so relevant at the moment. So that just makes it a bit more tricky, and I've kind of boiled it down to just writing about the Warriors on a Friday. But nonetheless, this is an interesting moment for the Warriors, considering they did defeat the Broncos, and the Broncos are full of turmoil at this stage. And now they face the Titans. So the Broncos and Titans are in the exact same position. 8 games, 2 wins, and 6 losses. Broncos have lost 5 in a row, whereas the Titans are 2-3 in that 5-game stretch. Titans seem a bit better. They seem like they're on the improve. They seem like a team who is slowly adjusting to their new coach. They're they're not necessarily a good team. They're not going to be pushing for the top 8, but I can see that there is improvement there. I can see the process involved in them getting better. Whereas I look at the Bulldogs, I look at the Dragons, I look at the Broncos, and even the Warriors to some extent, even the Cowboys, they're just teams, as we alluded to earlier in the week, who are catching up. At least for the Titans, they are crystal clear in what they're doing, who they are, where they're at the moment, and they're actually okay. I don't mind watching the Titans play rugby league. A couple of interesting Kiwi NRL players, Aaron Clark starting at hooker. Talked about Moeaki Fotuaika, Sam Lasoni. So Sam Lasoni and Aaron Clark are coming up against the Warriors again. A couple of interesting wrinkles there, but it's ultimately a Warriors team who should be able to defeat the Titans. Titans are alright though, they're on the rise, and I've voiced frustration with coming to conclusions about the Warriors based on wins against bottom 8 teams that just seem like they mean nothing. Yet at the same time, I am interested by what the Warriors do against the Titans, based on the fact that the Titans are kind of solid and they appear to be moving in the right direction. In theory, the Warriors should win, but I think there's going to be an interesting challenge laid down from the Titans, which brings me back to how are the Warriors going to deal with this? What are the Warriors going to do? And, can they actually win this game against the Titans, which is very interesting. And then as far as teams go, the team list, everything's fairly similar for the Warriors. There is the Tohu Harris factor, so Carl Lawton's named in the middle again, but you're going to see Tohu Harris shift to the edge. You're going to see Tohu Harris shift from edge to middle, and Carl Lawton's suddenly an edge forward. Carl Lawton's suddenly a center. Carl Lawton's suddenly everywhere, which is pretty cool. I don't mind it. I'm here for it. Jack Hetherington adds to the Warriors, and it's been interesting. Poasa Fa'amasili came into the Warriors team, leapfrogged everyone straight onto the bench. Jack Hetherington leapfrogged everyone straight on the bench and was pretty damn good for the Warriors last weekend, just his mobility. And this is also the return of Jazz Tavanga. So we've kind of forgot about Jazz Tavanga and all the Warriors mayhem, and shout out to all their injured players, because that might have changed the whole course of the season if the Warriors weren't ravaged by injury, but it is what it is. How Jazz Tavanga impacts this game, how Jazz Tavanga's middle forward work but where he bounces around, he gets offload, everything's a bit more creative with Jazz Tavanga playing through the middle. That might spark some attack for the Warriors. And I don't think this game is going to command the attention of casual rugby league fans. It's not going to be, a game of the round type of game, but from a Warriors perspective, it will be interesting to see, because I believe this is going to give Warriors fans and Kiwi sports fans who follow the Warriors, it's going to give them the best gauge so far of where they're at. And I say that because we've seen them defeat bottom 8 teams this season. And a win here against the Titans, in my mind, is going to have me feeling pretty comfortable about how I view the Warriors. If the Warriors defeat the Titans, then I'm going to be thinking like the Warriors, once again, 10th, 11th, 12th. They're okay, pretty solid, not good enough for the top 8. A loss against the Titans and the Warriors drop into that pack of the Broncos, Titans, and Bulldogs, and then you just wonder how their season might look from this point on. Obviously, Todd Payton's the coach now as well, so a win here would be good for him. A couple wins in a row would be pretty nice for everyone involved, and I think it's just an interesting gauge game for the Warriors this Friday night against the Titans.
Yeah, because the Titans, yeah, like you say, they've found a sort of solid foundation. They're not good, and they've got a lot of problems still, and they're still very much in that rebuilding phase. I think it's quite interesting looking at that Titans versus Broncos thing, because they are, like you said, they're on the like same record. They've literally got the same record, and like it goes as deep as they both have exactly minus 127 points difference too. The Titans beat the Broncos relatively comfortably a couple of weeks ago as well, didn't they? So the Titans, you could make a case, kind of in the same situation. They're literally in the same situation as the Broncos, but more recently than that, they're maybe in the same situation as the Warriors, where they did quite well to beat a Broncos team. They had that sort of relatively miracle win against the Tigers earlier as well, which I think was their first win in nearly 12 months or something, which little bit misleading because of the pandemic and all that. But yeah, like they're a team who's kind of, actually I think there's like a trilogy there, sort of with all three of those teams really, because let's go back to that Shawn Johnson thing about perception and reality as well. The way the Broncos are being talked about and the absolute disaster that the pressure those players are under, and like fellas are in tears after losing to the Warriors, which, I mean, yeah, okay, it's a bit awkward to lose to the Warriors at the moment, but the Warriors have proved that they're a team that'll just sort of they'll at least give you like an 80% effort. So in some games against weaker teams, that's enough to win. It has been 3 times since the lockdown ended, and the Titans are in a similar position in terms of how they're playing as well. Like, they can't give you a lot more than that 80%, but they're getting into like a space where they can at least give you that. And so if the team isn't able to perform against them, the opposition, they don't really get to dictate things, but if the opposition doesn't play above that, they're in with the mix, same as the Warriors have been. And then you look at the thing about that game between the Warriors and Broncos and how that sort of swung as well. And it's a weird little sort of trinity between those three teams and a couple different factors linking like 2 of the 3 back. And you can always, there's like is that what they're called? The Venn diagrams, where you get like the circles that interlace and sort of like that. I think you can make a decent one of those with these 3 teams here involved, which makes it all pretty interesting when they play against each other, doesn't it?
I'll take that a little bit further. Not
Please do.
Adding the Dragons, but we've got to keep in mind that Isaac Luke played for the Warriors, then went to the Dragons, then went to the Broncos. So, and I only say that because the Dragons are 13th. So they're right there with the Warriors, Broncos, and Titans. But with the Warriors, Broncos, and Titans, I think the Sam Lasoni and Aaron Clark factor takes us even deeper.
Oh, yeah.
Because you've got a couple of players there who didn't necessarily do their best work with the Warriors. Sam Lasoni's been fantastic for the Titans this season. And Aaron Clark was playing park footy in Auckland last year. And now he's starting hooker for the Titans, give or take an injury to Mitch Rain or whatever. With the Broncos, Stephen Kearney was the assistant coach at the Broncos, then he was the head coach at the Warriors. That's a factor there. Obviously, the Broncos and Titans are down the road from each other, but there's also like a massive recruitment war between the two clubs, not just the David Fafita thing at the moment, which is a absolute shambles mess, but the Broncos get a lot of their talent from Kebra Park, which is a Gold Coast Titans, not a Gold Coast Titans school, it's a high school on the Gold Coast. I think Kebra Park is actually aligned with the Bulldogs now. They were aligned with the Tigers for a long time, which is why Benji Marshall, Temare Martin, and Connolly Lamelu, who's starting at centre for the Cowboys this week, that's why they all went to the Tigers, because they were at Kebra Park. But a lot of these players who more modern Kebra Park players, you know, the Payne Haas, David Fafita, they got snapped up by the Broncos. Titans are trying to recruit Broncos players. They're trying to recruit Fanatesi Nu. They're trying to recruit David Fafita. It's all Jai Arrow left the Broncos, go to the Titans. Like, Broncos and Titans are straight up in a war for talent in that area of Queensland. You know, you've got you got Cody Nikarima, you got Adam Blair, former Broncos players at the Warriors. So yeah, it's everything's rather connected there. There is definitely a Venn diagram, not just in terms of specifics as far as players go and other notes, but also like their situations, their standing in the NRL. So there's a lot of their trajectories, a lot of crossover there. Wildcard. Nice point. Yeah, we'll wrap it up there, shall we? And we'll be back early next week to talk some more Kiwi sporting matters. Kia kaha, stay beautiful, enjoy the chilly old weather around Aotearoa, and enjoy your weekend of sport. Ch-ch-ch!